Russian Empire. The Russian Empire was a historical empire that extended across Eurasia and North America from 1721, following the end of the Great Northern War, until the Republic was proclaimed by the provisional government that took power after the February Revolution of 1917. The Russian Empire was the third largest empire in history, with its greatest extent stretching over 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and North America. It was surpassed in size only by the British and Mongol empires. The rise of the Russian Empire coincided with the decline of neighboring rival powers: the Swedish Empire, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Persia, the Ottoman Empire, and Manchu China. It played a major role in defeating Napoleon's ambitions to control Europe in 1812 to 1814 and expanded to the west and south, becoming one of the most powerful European empires of all time. Peter implemented sweeping reforms to modernize Russia. Heavily influenced by his advisors from Western Europe, Peter reorganized the Russian army along modern lines and made Russia a maritime power. Peter modernized Russia with unwavering resolve. He introduced French and Western dress to his court and required courtiers, state officials, and the military to shave their beards and adopt modern clothing styles. He wanted members of his family to marry other European royalty as part of his process to westernize Russia. As part of his reforms, Peter initiated an industrialization effort that was slow but ultimately successful. Russia's manufacturing and main exports were based on the mining and lumber industries. To improve Russia's position on the seas, Peter sought to gain more maritime outlets. At the time, his only outlet was the White Sea at Arkhangelsk. At the time, the Baltic Sea was controlled by Sweden in the north, while the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea were controlled by the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire, respectively, in the south. Russo-Persian War, 1722 to 1723. The Russo-Persian War of 1722 to 1723, known in Russian historiography as the Persian Campaign of Peter the Great, was a war between the Russian Empire and Safavid Iran. It was triggered by the Tsar's attempt to expand Russian influence in the Caspian and Caucasus regions, and to prevent its rival, the Ottoman Empire, from territorial gains in the region at the expense of declining Safavid Iran. Before the war, the Russian border was the Terek River. To the south, the Khanates of Dagestan were in fact nominal vassals of Iran. Russia's desire to expand to the southeast and Iran's temporary weakness were the ultimate causes of the war. The Russian victory confirmed the cession of territories in the North Caucasus, South Caucasus, and contemporary northern Iran to Russia. These included the cities of Derbent, southern Dagestan, and Baku, and their surrounding lands, as well as the provinces of Gilan, Shirvan, Mazandaran, and Astarabad. This was in accordance with the Treaty of St. Petersburg, 1723. First Kamchatka Expedition. The first Kamchatka expedition was the first Russian expedition to explore the Asian Pacific coast. It was commissioned by Peter the Great in 1724 and was led by Vitus Bering. From 1725 to 1731, it was Russia's first naval scientific expedition. It definitively proved the existence of a strait, now known as the Bering Strait, between Asia and America. The second Kamchatka expedition followed in 1732. Empress Anna Peter died in 1725, leaving an unsettled succession. After a short reign of his widow Catherine I, the crown passed to Empress Anna. She slowed down the reforms and led a successful war against the Ottoman Empire. This resulted in a significant weakening of the Crimean Khanate, an Ottoman vassal and long-term Russian adversary. Treaty of Kyakhta. The Treaty of Kyakhta, or Kyakhta, along with the Treaty of Nerchinsk, 1689, regulated the relations between Imperial Russia and the Qing Empire of China until the mid-19th century. It was signed by Tulashin and Count Sava Lukic Raguzinski Vladislavich at the border city of Kyakhta on 23 August 1727. Russo-Turkish War. The Russians were justified in going to war with the Turks because of the raids of the Crimean Tatars on the Cossack Hetmanate, Ukraine, in the end of 1735, and the Crimean Khan's military campaign in the Caucasus. The war also represented Russia's continuing struggle for access to the Black Sea. In July 1737, Austria entered the war against the Ottoman Empire, but was soundly defeated on numerous occasions. These included the Battle of Banja Luka on 4 August 1737, the Battle of Grocka from 18 to 22 July 1739, and finally the loss of Belgrade after an Ottoman siege from 18 July to September 1739. With the imminent threat of a Swedish invasion and Ottoman alliances with Prussia, Poland, and Sweden, Russia had no choice but to sign the Treaty of Niš with Turkey on 29 September. This ended the war. The peace treaty granted Azov to Russia and consolidated Russia's control over the Zaporizhzhia. For Austria, the war proved a stunning defeat. The Russian forces were much more successful on the field, but they lost tens of thousands to disease. It is impossible to estimate the number of losses and desertions among the Ottomans. Russo-Swedish War, 1741 to 1743. The Russo-Swedish War of 1741 to 1743 was instigated by the Hats, a Swedish political party that aspired to regain the territories lost to Russia during the Great Northern War, and by French diplomacy, which sought to divert Russia's attention from supporting its long-standing ally, the Habsburg monarchy, in the War of the Austrian Succession. The war was a disaster for Sweden, which lost more territory to Russia. 7 Years' War. The Russian Empire was originally aligned with Austria, fearing Prussia's ambition on the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, but switched sides upon the succession of Tsar Peter III in 1762. The Russians and the Austrians were determined to reduce the power of Prussia, the new threat on their doorstep, and Austria was anxious to regain Silesia, lost to Prussia in the War of the Austrian Succession. Along with France, Russia and Austria agreed in 1756 to mutual defense and an attack by Austria and Russia on Prussia, subsidized by France. The Russians defeated the Prussians several times in the war, but the Russians lacked the necessary logistical capability to follow up their victories with lasting gains, and in this sense, the salvation of the House of Hohenzollern was due more to Russian weakness with respect to logistics than to Prussian strength on the battlefield. The supply system that allowed the Russians to advance into the Balkans during the war with the Ottomans in 1787 to 1792, Marshal Alexander Suvorov to campaign effectively in Italy and Switzerland in 1798 to 1799, and for the Russians to fight across Germany and France in 1813 to 1814 to take Paris, was created directly in response to the logistic problems experienced by the Russians in the 7 Years' War. The taxation needed for war caused the Russian people considerable hardship, being added to the taxation of salt and alcohol begun by Empress Elizabeth in 1759 to complete her addition to the Winter Palace. Like Sweden, Russia concluded a separate peace with Prussia. Peter III of Russia. Peter III of Russia was a decisive leader. He withdrew Russian forces from the 7 Years' War and concluded a peace treaty with Prussia. He gave up on Russian conquests in Prussia and offered 12,000 troops to make an alliance with Frederick II of Prussia. Russia thus switched from an enemy of Prussia to an ally. Russian troops withdrew from Berlin and marched against the Austrians. The German-born Peter could hardly speak Russian and pursued a strongly pro-Prussian policy, which made him unpopular with many. He was deposed by troops loyal to his wife, Catherine, the former Princess Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, who, despite her own German origins, was a Russian nationalist. She succeeded him as Empress Catherine II. Peter died in captivity soon after his overthrow, and it is likely that Catherine approved of this as part of the coup conspiracy. Era of Catherine the Great, Catherine the Great, Catherine II, born Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, 2nd May 1729 in Stettin, 17th November 1796 in St. Petersburg, most commonly known as Catherine the Great, was the longest ruling female leader in Russian history. She ruled as Empress Regnant of all Russia from 1762 until 1796. She seized power in a coup d'état that overthrew her husband and second cousin, Peter III. During her reign, Russia expanded, its culture was revitalized, and it was recognized as one of the great powers of Europe. Catherine reformed the administration of Russian gubernias, governorates, and founded many new cities and towns on her orders. An admirer of Peter the Great, Catherine continued to modernize Russia along Western European lines. The period of Catherine the Great's rule, the Catherinian era, is indisputably a golden age of Russia. Construction of many mansions of the nobility, in the classical style endorsed by the Empress, transformed the country. She wholeheartedly embraced the ideals of the Enlightenment and is rightfully included in the ranks of the enlightened despots. Russo-Turkish War, 1768 to 1774. The Russo-Turkish War of 1768 to 1774 was a decisive victory for Russia over the Ottoman Empire. Russia's victory brought Kabardia, part of Moldavia, the Yenisei between the rivers Bug and Dnieper, and Crimea into the Russian sphere of influence. Despite a series of victories that led to substantial territorial conquests, including direct conquest over much of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the Russian Empire did not annex as much Ottoman territory as might have been expected. This was due to a complex struggle within the European diplomatic system to maintain a balance of power that was acceptable to other European states, and to avoid direct Russian hegemony over Eastern Europe. Russia was able to take advantage of the weakened Ottoman Empire, the end of the 7 Years' War, and the withdrawal of France from Polish affairs to assert itself as one of the continent's primary military powers. The war left the Russian Empire in a stronger position than ever before to expand its territory and maintain its dominance over the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This ultimately led to the First Partition of Poland. Colonization of Novorossiya Potemkin's Black Sea Fleet was a massive undertaking for its time. By 1787, the British ambassador confidently reported 27 ships of the line. Russia was now on a par with Spain in terms of naval power, although still lagging behind the Royal Navy. This was the pinnacle of Russia's naval power compared to other European states. Potemkin rewarded hundreds of thousands of settlers who moved into his territories. It is estimated that by 1782, the populations of Novorossiya and Azov had doubled during a period of exceptionally rapid development. The immigrants included Russians, foreigners, Cossacks, and, controversially, Jews. While the immigrants were not always happy in their new surroundings, Potemkin intervened directly to ensure families received the cattle to which they were entitled on at least one occasion. Outside of Novorossiya, he drew up the Azov-Mozdok defense line, constructing forts at Gorgievsk, Stavropol, and elsewhere, and ensuring that the whole of the line was settled. Crimean Khanate annexed. In March 1783, Prince Potemkin made a bold move to encourage Empress Catherine to annex Crimea. Having just returned from Crimea, he told her that many Crimeans would happily submit to Russian rule. Empress Catherine was convinced by this news and issued a formal proclamation of annexation on 19th April 1783. The Tatars did not resist the annexation. After years of turmoil, the Crimeans lacked the resources and the will to continue fighting. Many fled the peninsula, leaving for Anatolia. Crimea was incorporated into the empire as the Taurida Oblast. Later that year, the Ottoman Empire signed an agreement with Russia that recognized the loss of Crimea and other territories that had been held by the Khanate. Russo-Turkish War, 1787 to 1792. The Ottoman Empire attempted to regain lands lost to the Russian Empire in the previous Russo-Turkish War, 1768 to 1774, with the Russo-Turkish War of 1787 to 1792. It occurred at the same time as the Austro-Turkish War, 1788 to 1791. In 1787, the Ottomans demanded that the Russians evacuate the Crimea and give up their holdings near the Black Sea, which Russia saw as a casus belli. Russia declared war on 19 August 1787, and the Ottomans imprisoned the Russian ambassador, Yakov Bulgakov. The Ottoman preparations were inadequate, and the moment was ill-chosen, as Russia and Austria were now in alliance. Consequently, the Treaty of Jassy was signed on 9 January 1792, which recognized Russia's 1783 annexation of the Crimean Khanate. Yerevan, Odessa, and Ochakov was also ceded to Russia, and the Dniester became the Russian frontier in Europe, while the Russian Asiatic frontier, the Kuban River, remained unchanged. Russo-Swedish War, 1788 to 1790. The Russo-Swedish War of 1788 to 1790 was a minor conflict between Sweden and Russia. It lasted from June 1788 to August 1790 and was concluded by the Treaty of Varela on 14 August 1790. Overall, the war was insignificant for the parties involved. King Gustav III of Sweden initiated the conflict for domestic political reasons. He believed that a short war would leave the opposition with no recourse but to support him. Catherine II regarded the war against her Swedish cousin as a substantial distraction. Her land troops were tied up in the war against Turkey, and she was likewise concerned with revolutionary events unfolding in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Third May Constitution, and in France, the French Revolution. The Swedish attack thwarted Russia's plans to send its navy into the Mediterranean to support its forces fighting the Ottomans. It was needed to protect the capital, St. Petersburg. The Polish-Russian War of 1792 was a conflict between the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Targowica Confederation, with the Russian Empire under Catherine the Great as the other side. The war was fought in two distinct theaters, northern Lithuania and southern Ukraine. In both the northern and southern theaters, the Polish forces retreated before the numerically superior Russian forces. However, they offered significantly more resistance in the south, thanks to the effective leadership of Polish commanders Prince Józef Poniatowski and Tadeusz Kościuszko. During the three-month-long struggle, several battles were fought, but no side scored a decisive victory. Russia took 250,000 square kilometers, 97,000 square miles, of the Commonwealth's territory, while Prussia took 58,000 square kilometers, 22,000 square miles. This event reduced Poland's population to a mere one-third of what it was before the first partition. The Kościuszko Uprising, also known as the Polish Uprising of 1794 and the Second Polish War, was an uprising against the Russian Empire and the Kingdom of Prussia led by Tadeusz Kościuszko in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Prussian Partition in 1794. This was an unsuccessful attempt to liberate the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth from Russian influence following the Second Partition of Poland, 1793, and the formation of the Targowica Confederation. The uprising ended with the Russians occupying Warsaw. Era of reaction and Napoleonic Wars. Alexander becomes emperor. On 16 November 1796, Catherine rose early in the morning and had her usual morning coffee. She then settled down to work on papers. She told her lady's maid, Maria Perekusikina, that she had slept better than she had in a long time. At some point after 9, she was found on the floor with her face purplish, her pulse weak, her breathing shallow and labored. She died the following evening at around 9:45. Catherine's son Paul succeeded to the throne. He reigned until 1801, when he was assassinated. Alexander I succeeded to the throne on 23 March, 1801, and was crowned in the Kremlin on 15 September of that year. The War of the Third Coalition was a European conflict that spanned the years 1803 to 1806. France and its client states, led by Napoleon I, soundly defeated the Third Coalition, an alliance comprising the United Kingdom, the Holy Roman Empire, the Russian Empire, Naples, Sicily, and Sweden. Prussia remained neutral throughout the war. The Battle of Austerlitz is widely regarded as Napoleon's greatest victory. It saw the French Grande Armée defeat a larger Russian and Austrian army led by Emperor Alexander I and Holy Roman Emperor Francis II. The Russo-Turkish War, 1806 to 1812, broke out in 1805 to 1806 against the backdrop of the Napoleonic Wars. In 1806, Sultan Selim III deposed the pro-Russian Constantine Ypsilantis as Hospodar of the Principality of Wallachia and Alexander Marusis as Hospodar of Moldavia, both Ottoman vassal states. Simultaneously, the French Empire occupied Dalmatia and threatened to penetrate the Danubian principalities at any time. To safeguard the Russian border against a possible French attack, a 40,000-strong Russian contingent advanced into Moldavia and Wallachia. The Sultan reacted by blocking the Dardanelles to Russian ships and declaring war on Russia. According to the treaty, the Ottoman Empire ceded the eastern half of Moldavia to Russia, which renamed the territory as Bessarabia, although it had committed to protecting that region. Russia became a new power in the lower Danube area and reaped the benefits economically, diplomatically, and militarily. The treaty was approved by Alexander I of Russia on 11 June, just 13 days before Napoleon's invasion of Russia began. The commanders were able to get many of the Russian soldiers in the Balkans back to the western areas before the expected attack of Napoleon. Battle of Friedland. The Battle of Friedland, which took place on the 14th of June in the year 1807, was a major engagement of the Napoleonic Wars between the French Empire, led by Napoleon I, and the Russian Empire, led by Count von Bennigsen. Napoleon and the French secured a resounding victory, routing much of the Russian army and forcing them to retreat in disarray across the Ala River by the end of the fighting. The battlefield is located in modern-day Kaliningrad Oblast, near the town of Pravdinsk, Russia. On the 19th of June, Emperor Alexander sent an envoy to seek an armistice with the French. Napoleon made it clear to the envoy that the Vistula River marked the natural border between French and Russian influence in Europe. On that basis, the two emperors began peace negotiations at the town of Tilsit after meeting on an iconic raft on the River Niemen. Finnish War. The Finnish War was a conflict between the Kingdom of Sweden and the Russian Empire that took place between the 21st of February in the year 1808 and the 17th of September in the year 1809. The war resulted in the eastern third of Sweden becoming the autonomous Grand Duchy of Finland within the Russian Empire. Other notable effects were the Swedish Parliament's adoption of a new constitution and the establishment of the House of Bernadotte, the new Swedish royal house, in the year 1818. The French invasion of Russia was a bold move by Napoleon to force Russia back into the continental blockade of the United Kingdom. On the 24th of June in the year 1812, the first wave of the Grande Armée crossed the border into Russia with around 400,000 to 450,000 soldiers. The opposing Russian field forces amounted to around 180,000 to 200,000 at this time. Napoleon pushed his army rapidly through western Russia in a futile attempt to destroy the retreating Russian army of Michael Andreas Barclay de Tolly. He won just the Battle of Smolensk in August. The Russian army, under the command of Mikhail Kutuzov, continued to retreat, employing attrition warfare against Napoleon. This forced the invaders to rely on a supply system that was incapable of feeding their large army in the field. On the 14th of September, Napoleon and his army of about 100,000 men occupied Moscow, only to find it abandoned. The city was soon ablaze. Out of an original force of 615,000, only 110,000 frostbitten and half-starved survivors stumbled back into France. The Russian victory over the French army in 1812 was a significant blow to Napoleon's ambitions of European dominance. This war was the reason the other coalition allies finally defeated Napoleon once and for all. His army was shattered and morale was low. This was true for French troops still in Russia, fighting battles just before the campaign ended, and for the troops on other fronts. Caucasian War. The Caucasian War, spanning from 1817 to 1864, was an invasion of the Caucasus by the Russian Empire. Russia annexed the areas of the North Caucasus and ethnically cleansed the Circassians. The Caucasian War was a series of military actions waged by the Russian Empire against the native peoples of the Caucasus, including the Chechens, Adige, Abkhaz-Abaza, Ubyks, Kumyks, and Dagestanians. Russia sought to expand its territory, and among the Muslims, resistance to the Russians was described as jihad. Russian control of the Georgian military highway in the center effectively divided the Caucasian War into two distinct conflicts: the Russo-Circassian War in the west and the Murid War in the east. Other territories of the Caucasus, comprising contemporary eastern Georgia, southern Dagestan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, were incorporated into the Russian Empire at various times in the 19th century, as a result of Russian wars with Persia. The Russians also took western Georgia from the Ottomans during the same period. Decembrist Revolt. The Decembrist Revolt took place in Russia on the 26th of December in the year 1825. It was a direct result of the sudden death of Emperor Alexander I. Alexander's heir apparent Constantine had privately declined the succession, unknown to the court. His younger brother Nicholas decided to take power as Emperor Nicholas I, pending formal confirmation. While some of the army had sworn loyalty to Nicholas, a force of about 3,000 troops attempted a military coup in favor of Constantine. The rebels, despite being weakened by internal strife between their leaders, confronted the loyalists outside the Senate building in the presence of a large crowd. In the confusion, the emperor's envoy, Mikhail Miloradovich, was assassinated. The loyalists opened fire with heavy artillery, scattering the rebels. Many were sentenced to death, imprisonment, or exile to Siberia. The conspirators were known as the Decembrists. The Russo-Persian War of 1826 to 1828 was the last major military conflict between the Russian Empire and Persia. After the Treaty of Gulistan that concluded the previous Russo-Persian War in 1813, peace reigned in the Caucasus for 13 years. However, Fath Ali Shah, in need of foreign subsidies, relied on the advice of British agents, who advised him to reconquer the territories lost to the Russian Empire and pledged their support for military action. In spring 1826, a bellicose party of Abbas Mirza prevailed in Tehran, and the Russian minister Alexander Sergeyevich Menshikov was placed under house arrest. The war ended in 1828 with the occupation of Tabriz. The war had even more disastrous results for Persia than the 1804 to 1813 war. The Treaty of Turkmenchay stripped Persia of its last remaining territories in the Caucasus, which comprised all of modern Armenia, the southern remainder of modern Azerbaijan, and modern Igdir in Turkey. The war marked the end of the era of the Russo-Persian Wars. Russia was now the unquestionable dominant power in the Caucasus. The Russo-Turkish War of 1828 to 1829 was sparked by the Greek War of Independence of 1821 to 1829. The war began after the Ottoman Sultan Mahmud II closed the Dardanelles to Russian ships and revoked the 1826 Ackermann Convention in retaliation for Russian participation in October 1827 in the Battle of Navarino. The Russians laid prolonged sieges to three key Ottoman citadels in modern Bulgaria: Shumla, Varna, and Silistra. With the support of the Black Sea Fleet under Alexei Greig, Varna was captured on 29 September. The siege of Shumla proved much more problematic, as the 40,000-strong Ottoman garrison outnumbered the Russian forces. The Sultan was forced to sue for peace after facing several defeats. The Treaty of Adrianople, signed on 14 September 1829, gave Russia most of the eastern shore of the Black Sea and the mouth of the Danube. Turkey recognized Russian sovereignty over parts of northwest present-day Armenia. Serbia achieved autonomy, and Russia was allowed to occupy Moldavia and Wallachia. The Great Game was a political and diplomatic confrontation between the British Empire and the Russian Empire over Afghanistan, the Tibetan Kingdom, and neighboring territories in Central and South Asia. It existed for most of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. It also had direct consequences in Persia and British India. Britain was certain that Russia would invade India to add to the vast empire that Russia was building. As a result, there was a deep atmosphere of distrust and talk of war between the two major European empires. Britain made it a top priority to protect all the approaches to India. The Great Game is how the British did this. Some historians have concluded that Russia had no plans involving India, as the Russians repeatedly stated to the British. The Great Game began on 12 January 1830, when Lord Ellenborough, the president of the Board of Control for India, gave Lord William Bentinck, the Governor-General, the task of establishing a new trade route to the Emirate of Bukhara. Britain intended to gain control over the Emirate of Afghanistan and make it a protectorate. To achieve this, it would use the Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Khanate of Khiva, and the Emirate of Bukhara as buffer states between both empires. The Crimean War was a military conflict fought from October 1853 to February 1856. Russia lost to an alliance made up of France, the Ottoman Empire, the United Kingdom, and Sardinia. The immediate cause of the war was the rights of Christian minorities in the Holy Land, which was then part of the Ottoman Empire. The French championed the rights of Roman Catholics, while Russia championed those of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Longer-term causes were the decline of the Ottoman Empire and the unwillingness of Britain and France to allow Russia to gain territory and power at the Ottoman Empire's expense. Emancipation and industrialization. Emancipation Reform of 1861. The Emancipation Reform of 1861 in Russia was the first and most important of the liberal reforms passed during the reign, 1855-1881, of Emperor Alexander II of Russia. The reform definitively abolished serfdom throughout the Russian Empire. Russian conquest of Central Asia. The Russian conquest of Central Asia was a defining moment in the second half of the 19th century. The land that became Russian Turkestan and later Soviet Central Asia is now divided between Kazakhstan in the north, Uzbekistan across the center, Kyrgyzstan in the east, Tajikistan in the southeast, and Turkmenistan in the southwest. The area was called Turkestan because the majority of its inhabitants spoke Turkic languages, with the exception of Tajikistan, which speaks an Iranian language. The Alaska Purchase was the United States' acquisition of Alaska from the Russian Empire. On 18 October 1867, Alaska was formally transferred to the United States through a treaty ratified by the United States Senate. Russia had established a presence in North America during the first half of the 18th century, but few Russians ever settled in Alaska. In the aftermath of the Crimean War, Russian Tsar Alexander II began exploring the possibility of selling Alaska. It was clear that it would be difficult to defend in any future war from being conquered by Russia's arch-rival, the United Kingdom. Following the end of the American Civil War, U.S. Secretary of State William Seward entered into negotiations with Russian Minister Eduard de Steckel for the purchase of Alaska. On 30 March 1867, Seward and Steckel signed a treaty, which was swiftly ratified by the United States Senate. The purchase added 586,412 square miles, 1,518,800 square kilometers of new territory to the United States for the cost of $7.2 million in 1867 dollars. In modern terms, the cost was equivalent to $133 million in 2020 dollars or 37 cents per acre. Russo-Turkish War, 1877-1878. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877-1878 was a conflict between the Ottoman Empire and the Eastern Orthodox coalition led by the Russian Empire and composed of Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. The war was fought in the Balkans and the Caucasus. It originated in the emerging 19th century Balkan nationalism. Additional factors included Russian goals of recovering territorial losses endured during the Crimean War, re-establishing itself in the Black Sea, and supporting the political movement attempting to free Balkan nations from the Ottoman Empire. Assassination of Alexander II of Russia. On 13 March 1881, Tsar Alexander II of Russia, known as the Liberator, was assassinated in St. Petersburg, Russia. Alexander II was killed while returning to the Winter Palace from Mikhailovsky Manege in a closed carriage. Alexander II had previously survived several attempts on his life, including the attempts by Dmitry Karakozov and Alexander Soloviev, the attempt to dynamite the imperial train in Zaporizhzhia, and the bombing of the Winter Palace in February 1880. The assassination is widely regarded as the most successful action carried out by the Russian nihilist movement of the 19th century. Industrialization in the Russian Empire. Industrialization in the Russian Empire was a clear and decisive move towards an industrial economy. This saw a significant increase in labor productivity and the partial provision of industrial goods from within the empire. Industrialization in the Russian Empire was a direct response to the industrialization process in Western European countries. By the late 1880s, heavy industry was booming. Production volumes increased fourfold and the number of workers doubled. The government made deliberate efforts that led to an unprecedented industrial boom that began in 1893. The years of this boom were a time of economic modernization of Russia under the auspices of the state. Sergius Vita was a Russian statesman who served as the first prime minister of the Russian Empire, replacing the Tsar as head of the government. He was neither liberal nor conservative, but he attracted foreign capital to boost Russia's industrialization. He modernized the Russian economy and encouraged foreign investment, particularly from its new ally, France. Prelude to Revolution and End of the Empire. First Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. The first Congress of the RSDLP was held between 15 March 1898 in Minsk, Russian Empire, now Belarus, in secrecy. The venue was a house belonging to Rumyantsev, a railway worker on the outskirts of Minsk, now in the town center. They were celebrating the name day of Rumyantsev's wife. A stove was kept burning in the next room in case they needed to burn secret papers. Lenin smuggled a draft program for the party written in milk between the lines of a book. The Socialist Revolutionary Party, or Party of Socialist Revolutionaries, was a major political party in late Imperial Russia and both phases of the Russian Revolution and early Soviet Russia. The party was established in 1902 as a result of the Northern Union of Socialist Revolutionaries, founded in 1896, which brought together numerous local socialist revolutionary groups established in the 1890s. These included the Workers' Party of Political Liberation of Russia, created by Catherine Breshkovsky and Grigory Gershuny in 1899. The party's program was democratic and socialist. It garnered much support among Russia's rural peasantry, who in particular supported their program of land socialization over the Bolshevik program of land nationalization. The Bolsheviks wanted to divide land into peasant tenants rather than collectivize it into authoritarian state management. Russo-Japanese War. The Russo-Japanese War was fought between the Empire of Japan and the Russian Empire during 1904 and 1905 over rival imperial ambitions in Manchuria and Korea. The major theaters of military operations were the Liaodong Peninsula and Mukden in southern Manchuria, and the seas around Korea, Japan, and the Yellow Sea. 1905 Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution of 1905, also known as the First Russian Revolution, was a wave of mass political and social unrest that spread through vast areas of the Russian Empire. Some of this unrest was directed at the government. It included worker strikes, peasant unrest, and military mutinies. The revolution led to constitutional reform, including the establishment of the State Duma, the multi-party system, and the Russian Constitution of 1906. The 1905 revolution was undoubtedly spurred by the Russian defeat in the Russo-Japanese War. Some historians are convinced that the 1905 revolution paved the way for the 1917 Russian revolutions, and that Bolshevism emerged as a distinct political movement in Russia despite being a minority. Lenin, as later head of the USSR, called it the Great Dress Rehearsal. Without it, the victory of the October Revolution in 1917 would have been impossible. Battle of Tsushima. The Battle of Tsushima was a major naval battle fought between Russia and Japan during the Russo-Japanese War. It was the first and last decisive sea battle fought by modern steel battleship fleets. It was also the first naval battle in which wireless telegraphy, radio, played a critically important role. It is clear that this was the dying echo of the old era. In the history of naval warfare, this was the last time that ships of the line of a beaten fleet surrendered on the high seas. On 28 July 1914, the Russian Empire entered World War I. This was not an immediate decision. It was a gradual process that began 3 days earlier. This began with Austria-Hungary's declaration of war against Serbia, which was a Russian ally at the time. The Russian Empire issued a stark ultimatum from St. Petersburg to Vienna, warning Austria-Hungary not to attack Serbia. Russia began mobilizing its reserve army near its border with Austria-Hungary in response to the invasion of Serbia. Consequently, on 31 July, the German Empire in Berlin demanded that Russia demobilize. There was no response, so Germany declared war on Russia on the same day, 1st August 1914. Germany moved first against France on 3 August, in accordance with its war plan. Germany sent its main armies through Belgium to surround Paris. The threat to Belgium was the final straw. Britain declared war on Germany on 4 August. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers and fought Russia along their border. The Russian Revolution was a period of political and social revolution that took place in the former Russian Empire and began during the First World War. The Russian Revolution began in 1917 with the fall of the House of Romanov and concluded in 1923 with the Bolshevik establishment of the Soviet Union at the end of the Russian Civil War. It was a series of 2 revolutions. The first overthrew the imperial government, and the second placed the Bolsheviks in power. The new government established by the Bolsheviks signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with the Central Powers in March 1918, taking it out of the war. This led to the Central Powers' victory on the Eastern Front and Russia's defeat in World War I. Execution of the Romanov family. The Russian Imperial Romanov family, Emperor Nicholas II, his wife Empress Alexandra, and their 5 children. On the night of 16-17 July 1918, the Bolshevik revolutionaries shot and bayoneted to death the Romanov family, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, under the orders of the Ural Regional Soviet in Yekaterinburg.
We offer you deep historical information from history on YouTube channel. Subscribe. Now don't forget to turn on notifications.